Before we get to this episode of the Banquet Hall's 4K Film Club, it just didn't feel right to put out an episode that's newly recorded without addressing something that is too big to just be the elephant in the room. If I were to go downstairs, hop in my car, and hit the 10 West right now, within 30 minutes, I could be at some of the protests against just the inhumane violence that's happening in the city of Los Angeles, my hometown, and not just LA. It's happening in many places in our nation. Um, there's not really much to say. Just want to make sure that I do my due diligence as an artist and a creative to stay consistent and authentic with the messaging that I put out there in any art form that I'm putting out there. And I love movies as a form of escapism. We live in a time where we're looking for escapism. We're talking about sinners looking for freedom in a lot of ways and freedom from many things. And for me, podcasting has been a refuge for that. And I know there are people who engage with this content who care so deeply about all the things that are going on in our world. But to be very specific and talk about the ice rays, the inhumane ice rays that are going on, makes it hard to want to create. But at the same time, I just want to continue the dialogue, continue the conversation, and continue creating. So for those of you all who might have loved ones impacted by what's going on, folks who are present at the protests, or just have a human heart, a human spirit, just know that you are heard, you are seen, and this podcast can't save the world, but it is a part of it. And I want to make sure to just hold space for everything that's going on before we get into the episode. But without further ado, welcome back to the 4K Film Club, and this is part two of our conversation about Sinners. So, as always, make sure you like, subscribe, follow the podcast, share the podcast with someone who loves movies, someone who's seen Sinners, can't stop thinking about Sinners, and wants to engage with it critically, authentically. And thank you all y'all tuning in who tuned into the first part of this conversation about Sinners. Just overwhelming great feedback from that episode. Folks like to just hear another Black voice talking about a Black movie, centering Blackness, centering authenticity. And so for this part, as promised in the first part, really wanted to focus in on some of the things that y'all mentioned about Sinners. So a few weeks back, I put something on my story. Um, it says, what was the most authentically Black thing about Sinners? With the caveat that I was only interested in hearing from Black people, and hopefully that is self-explanatory. There is time and space for non-Black folks to engage in conversations about Sinners. For the research part of this podcast, that wasn't the time. But anyone's welcome to comment, to share some of your thoughts just when it comes to talking about authentic Blackness. Y'all get it. You kind of got to be Black. You have to be authentically Black to share about authentic Blackness. Um, so wanted to share some of these responses, sharing some of the things that have come up in conversations with friends as we've discussed Sinners, as we talked about the podcast. And once again, make sure y'all let me know some of your thoughts, some of the things that resonate with you, some of the things that maybe you didn't think of. If this is your first time hearing it, let us know in the comments. So let's start with the first one coming from the Orange Line Poet, which if y'all have been to Black Expression, if y'all have been to various poetry or art events in the community of San Diego, y'all might have had the blessing to hear the Orange Line Poet spit. Definitely check out his work, check out his page. The brother's trying to do amazing work in community. The first thing that he mentioned was when Cornbread was talking smack about Annie's cooking when he tried to get back in. And once again, going back to the first part of the conversation when we talk about the movie showing and not necessarily telling, this is really that part of the movie where they want to make sure you understand, like, hey, they have to let the vampires in order for anything to happen. And so Cornbread comes walking back up. The cast of the movie has just started to fully understand the situation at hand, and just the smack talk, it sounded straight out of a backyard. If y'all been to a cookout, y'all been to a backyard barbecue, you heard some type of tone of conversation between two people who may or may not like each other, may love each other a lot. Um, but just when Cornbread was talking, like when Cornbread's talking about her grits, when she's talking about why can't you walk your big ass up in here, those are just like those your cousins talking, that's your auntie talking, that's your uncle talking. So definitely agree with that. The next one, also from the Orange Line Poet, and a few others also brought this up. Of course, it's, as I mentioned last episode, the scene of the movie, the generations of music connecting to Sammy when he played. Just when you talk about Sinners with people who have seen Sinners, the scene, like I said last episode, I feel like it's either going to hit or miss for people. I say 99% of the people I've been talking to, that scene is a hit. And then once again, from Destiny, really dope artist. If y'all haven't seen her episode of the podcast, make sure you check out. It was a live episode. She talked about her painting process, painting murals. But she said the scene connecting Black music across generations, all caps, amazing. It's just, once again, when you have representation in film, you have things that you're not used to seeing on screen. It's just a beautiful depiction. The homie Zay, formerly known as Zay's Fades, not trusting white folk off the jump. Needless to say, authentically Black experiences. Somebody commented about, once again, Annie saying why you need to tell your big ass to come in. The homie Ashley, when they was wondering why all of a sudden niggas needed an invite to come in. I think y'all see a pattern here. There's just things that are so resonant with folks when they're watching this movie. And then closing us out, Queen Victoria, once again, another friend of the podcast. Check out her episode. And then she mentioned combo of things: spirituality, family, and obviously, quote unquote, the scene that changed us. Just once again, I think Sinners is a movie that, through authentically Black depictions, just has resonated with folks across the diaspora, folks from a variety of backgrounds, a variety of interests. And once again, all of this packaged in a quote unquote vampire movie. So beyond what I put on my story, as I mentioned, I've been having conversations about Sinners ever since the movie came out. And I just wanted to highlight some of the words that people are using when they talk about the movie. They say things like delicious, captivating, grassroots, collective joy, and the concept of a movie being delicious. Like, let's really sit and unpack that. Obviously, people use hyperbole all the time to talk about things that they like, things that they enjoy, but it's kind of hard not to look into that aspect of something nourishing for your soul, something that's feeding you. Like, you feel full after watching the movie. Once again, the movie's like 2 hours. It flies by for the most part, but you leave really feeling like you have this full, authentic experience. And I can't remember if I talked about it too much in the last episode, but one of the things that I really appreciate about Sinners is that it's an all-in-one day movie. Obviously, you get a little bit from the morning after, but for the most part, this is all something that happens over the course of a day. We're with the characters, we're immersed into the story, we're walking with them as they build out the juke joint, get the people together, rally the troops, get the team together. Recently, Sinners came out on digital platforms, so if y'all haven't seen it but have tuned into the podcast, you can actually rent it on Amazon Prime. And there's also deleted scenes, there's additional footage, which I haven't watched yet. Perhaps I'll watch it at a later date, preferably with somebody maybe. If y'all trying to pull up for a live podcast, we can watch the deleted scenes of Sinners and unpack those. But from what I've seen online, one of the scenes, you get a little bit more of an inside scoop as to that process of building the juke joint. But back into the all-in-one day movie, you look at movies like Ferris Bueller's Day Off. You look at movies where you're following a character or a group of characters all throughout their life in one day, just to see how many little things can lead to just an amazing story, and utilizing that as an amazing storytelling device. And I think you even see it with yourself. If you look at all those days in your life, those moments in your life when you're like, dang, my life could be a sitcom. Because you wake up, you go outside and you see something wild that's happening. You go to work, somebody says something off the wall that pisses you off. You have a phone conversation with your friend, has you cracking up. All those little moments of your day, when you stretch them out when you leave space to really talk about these little things, it can really make for great storytelling. And that's not to say that every single All in One Day movie is just fantastic storytelling. I'm sure there's plenty of examples of things that happen all in one day that don't quite hit as hard as Sinners or don't land as well as Sinners landed for me and for many others. But just the notion of walking with these characters all in one day, just fantastic. And I think that goes into one of the things I talked about a little bit in part one in terms of criticism of the movie, just wanting to understand more about where the vampires came from, understand more context. I think that Sinners and many movies work well when you relinquish this need to understand. The next episode of the podcast is going to be on action movies. And as a precursor to that, one of the things that I feel is really a hallmark of a really good action movie is even if the technology or if the plot doesn't make 1,000% sense, like if I really get my analytical brain out, things don't add up. If I don't even think about needing to understand what's going on because I'm so captivated, I'm so entertained by what's going on the screen, I can have a really good experience without having this full need to understand. And I think with Sinners, especially on subsequent watches, I understand what the movie is about. I understand what the movie aims to do. So I'm able to relinquish this need to understand or need to know more and just engage with the movie that's presented in front of me. Because I think that the more that you need to understand the greater context outside of what the characters are saying, the more it can take you out of the movie. And once again, valid criticism of a movie if you feel like you don't understand as much as you need to be fully entertained, but just not something that I felt the need to understand. Some other things from Sinners that I feel are really emblematic of why I feel the movie works. One, I mentioned this a lot in episode one, so I won't spend too much time on it, but real characters that highlight little nuggets of history, like I mentioned, greater historical context when it comes to what are the nationalities, who are the ethnicities of some of the non-Black characters in the movie, sparking conversations about what Clarksdale, Mississippi looked like in 1932, because I've heard people say that, I thought it was weird that they just quote unquote threw in those Chinese people into the movie. Whereas the Chinese culture, Chinese people, they do have a history within the American South. They were a part of these communities, as the movie showed really well. And one of the things that I thought of when thinking about things to talk about for the Sinners pod was thinking about how the non-Black characters are represented and how authentic that is to a lot of Black experience when it comes to putting on community events. Because I think back at times when I was in BSU at UCSD and how many times there were non-Black folks at BSU meetings, at BSU events. Whereas I'll be very honest, when I first started being involved in BSU, I was kind of like, why are these non-Black people here? This is a Black space. And to be fair, I think there are times where BSU events should be completely Black. Like, I'm not afraid, I'm not running from saying that. But I think when you talk about true allyship, when you talk about communities, villages, you're going to have, or you can have, I should say, non-Black allies or allies that don't identify with you. So yeah, there were some BSU meetings where there would be an Asian American student who's there, a white student who's there, and there were times where they were there intrusively, where it felt like they were just trying to see what the Black folks were up to. But there were times where people showed up authentically. One of the more recent episodes I did as far as interviews was Amadi. She was somebody who frequented some BSU events. We talked on a podcast episode about working together at the campus community centers. She is a great example of someone who understands privilege in a space and understands what they bring to a space, but also understands what they can do to amplify the marginalized voices. I started this podcast with calling out some of the things that are happening in our world politically, or in our nation politically, in our city politically. And when I think about what allyship looks like, it brings me a lot of joy when I go on social media and see people sharing stories of oppressed peoples who may not share the identities that they have, or may not share the identities of people in their family, just because, one, there's a lot of identities that are invisible and you may not know who in your circles hold those identities and who sees what you say or post online. But it is important for those who do have those experiences, have those identities, to see where their support is at. And all of this bottled into conversations around the non-Black folks and Sinners, and how they needed the assistance of Grace to get the signs made for the juke joint. These are all little things when you look at them under a microscope, but they all fit into this big picture. And one last thing I'll say about kind of that student activism in a college environment, and also speaking to some contemporary events, I remember the first time, or at least the first time that comes to mind in my memory that I heard the phrase, quote unquote, no, when I heard the phrase Free Palestine, was a part of the closing of many student meetings, whether it's MECHA, whether it's KP, whether it's BSU. But we had these conversations showing solidarity with the press peoples around the world when we did the Holla Back, just these unity claps, these moments when we're making space for marginalized peoples. When you see people talking about the genocide that Israel is committing, and they're saying things like, oh, or talking about it or contextualizing it as if this is all new. Of course, recent events are recent events, but the greater historical context goes well beyond that. And that brings me to the third point about why I think Sinners really works. It's not exposition heavy. And for those of y'all who may not have heard of the phrase exposition in a movie context, that's when the movie's going on, the characters doing what they're doing, and then it almost feels like they turn straight to camera and tell you, so the reason why I'm doing this is because when I was 16 years old, my father left me. And when I was on the basketball team playing the game, I really wished he was there. And it's like, all right, like now I'm completely out of the movie because you're no longer showing me a movie. You're just telling me backstory. I feel like this is why a lot of movies fail. Well, I feel like this shows up a lot in quote unquote bad movies where they don't spend as much time developing complex characters, developing a story, taking their time telling a story, but they're rushing to just get through all the miscellaneous details that you need to know to enjoy the story. And a lot of the times when it comes to screenwriting, you can't really avoid exposition, but the best movies, the best writers, the best editors, they find a way to fold the exposition into other things so that to where you don't feel like you're being talked at by a narrator, or you feel like the characters break character to just tell you story. A lot of times that you can call it out is when it feels like, is that something that somebody would say in conversation? Like, for example, you have a high school movie, two friends who are supposed to be best friends in the movie, and one of them says, well, you know, when I was 9 years old, I played the saxophone, you remember, right? And it's like, that sounds kind of weird. And with Sinners, like I said, with the vampires, like I said, with the non-Black characters, it just does a good job of telling you a story, putting you in this story without telling you details to camera, or without having characters just explain background too heavy-handedly. I'm not saying it doesn't happen at all in the movie. I think you get it a lot with some of Mary's character development when she's talking about her mom passing away, when she's talking about her relationship with the Smokestack twins. But at the same time, I think Ryan Coogler as a writer, and if he had a team of writers and editors, the folks who worked on the script, I think they did a good job at making it feel like more organic conversation versus heavy exposition. And that gets into complex characters. The characters within Sinners, they're not these one-note characters. They're not just, their only personality trait isn't that they like basketball or they like rap or that they're from New York, but these are characters who are complex, whether it's with ideologies, whether it's with their spirituality, religion, whether it's with their talent, their abilities, what they're able to provide to the juke joint. You have these very complex characters, and I think most importantly, you have a complex quote-unquote antagonist. And I think even by the fact I'm saying quote-unquote antagonist, but you have Remick as a vampire in the movie. He kind of spearheads some of the action that goes against our proverbial heroes of the story. Sammy specifically, more smoke than Stack, but the Smokestack twins overall. But you have Remick where he's sympathetic, like I said in the earlier episode, you don't necessarily hate him the whole movie. Obviously, as an audience, there's things that are queued up by the cinematics of the movie that let us know we're not supposed to be on Remick's side necessarily, but there are still those endearing parts. Like I mentioned, when they hit that banjo move, I called it the guitar last episode, when Mary goes outside and they're sympathizing with her, it really adds to the storytelling because you can kind of see why someone, if they're at their lowest or if they're at a vulnerable point in their life, that they might fall for the vampire song, they might fall for the vampire spell and join this quote unquote community. And then, of course, just generally, it's just great movie making. The cinematography, the writing, as I've mentioned and awarded a lot throughout these 2 episodes. Sinners is funny. We mentioned some of the funniest moments in the movie last episode, but I think these are all things that coming into the movie, I didn't necessarily know what I was going to get. I didn't know if I was going to be laughing. Once again, it's advertised as a horror movie. Depending on what you knew about it, you might have known it was a vampire movie. So you might not go into it expecting to be laughing as much as you do. And one of the trademarks, which I'll talk a little bit about once you cover a more comedy-centric movie, I should say. But what percentage of a movie's jokes hit? And Sinners has a high hit percentage. From little things that ease some of the tension in certain moments, but don't take you fully out of the story. Character development moments, just all these different things that really allow the audience to go along for the ride. We're having fun. We feel like that we're there with the characters. As I mentioned, it feels like an immersive story. So immersive that probably the greatest quote that I could include in these episodes comes from a friend who shall remain anonymous. But her and I were on the phone and we were talking about Sinners before I recorded episode 1. And we were talking about some of the things that I mentioned in the episode, authentically Black moments, funny moments, sexy moments. And we talked about the sexiest moment in the movie. Last episode, we were talking about the relationship between Pearline and Sammy, but getting into how immersive Ryan Coogler made the movie. She said, and I quote, well, not I quote, she said, when Annie and Smoke had their sex scene, I quote, she said, I felt like I was in them cheeks. I want y'all to sit with that for a second. Somebody was watching a movie and it was so impactful, so immersive, they felt like they was getting their cheeks. That's cinema, y'all. But like I said, I really want to thank y'all for engaging with the film club. I really hope to bring y'all very consistent episodes of this. As I mentioned, I go to the movies a lot. So as long as Imposter Syndrome don't hit too hard, and as long as I feel like people actually want to hear what I have to say, and I have to feel like recording episode 2, hoping to get y'all episodes about both new releases, old releases. Next up on the podcast, we have Ballerina, which is a new movie from the John Wick franchise. If y'all haven't seen it, definitely give it a watch. I'm gonna give my thoughts on that, as well as I alluded to, what makes a good action movie, what makes a fun action movie. But let me know in the comments, let me know on social media what movies y'all want to discuss within the film club. I want to do episodes about some classics, cult classics, as well as those that quote unquote everybody has to see. Just want to have fun, y'all, but make sure y'all engage with the content. The more that y'all engage, the more that y'all share y'all's opinion, the more episodes we can do, and the fuller the conversation will be. I got some feedback on comments and some feedback in DMs from the Sinners Pod, but no voice notes yet. I really would like to include some voice notes in the podcast. So if you have additional takes on Sinners, or if you have questions about movies, DM at Banquet Hall Pod. Let me know your takes. Let me know your questions, and I'll be happy to include them in the episode. Just let me know that I can use the audio, of course. Make sure y'all follow the podcast wherever you get your podcasts. Recently just uploaded an episode with a friend, Dominique, and we had a great conversation over some tea about masculinity, about boundaries, about learning, unlearning, protecting your inner child. So much in that conversation, and it's a multi-parter. Part 1 is up by the time you're watching this, and hopefully part 2 coming not too far after. But hope y'all enjoyed this shorter episode of Film Club. Looking forward to talking to y'all about Ballerina next time. But thank y'all for tuning in. If y'all did decide to download Letterboxd after last episode, make sure y'all follow me on Letterboxd at The Fourth Kyler. Check out thefourthkyler.com for prior episodes of the Banquet Hall podcast. The podcast is available on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever you get your favorite podcasts. And while you're on the website, make sure you check out the blog. Trying to do a lot more writing, put out a lot more content. Just really want to share what I have to say in the form that even though I podcast a lot now, the form that's always going to feel most natural to me is writing. By the time this episode is up, I hope to have a blog post up about the banquet hall. It's been over 2 years doing this podcast now, and the podcast has grown so much. I've grown as a person and an artist so much. And most importantly, the ethos of the podcast has evolved and grown. So this blog post is an opportunity to talk about the banquet hall in a way that I've alluded to from episode to episode, but especially for new listeners, folks who might be tuning in for the podcast for the first time. Really want y'all to understand the purpose of the podcast, why it exists, why even bother to put film critiques or film analysis on a podcast like the banquet hall. I just really want to paint the full picture for everybody. But thank y'all for tuning into this episode, and we'll catch y'all next time.